Hello to everyone who is joining us. People will probably start to come on here shortly. So hello, welcome. We are Race to Zero Waste, and this is the first in our series for Zero Waste Action Month. We're going to be doing a few interviews each week through the month of October. So welcome. This is our first one where we'll be talking about textiles, fabrics, and uniforms and clothing and all kinds of things that are made of our textiles. So hopefully there will be something interesting for all of you here, from a personal level to a business level to a policy advocacy level. We're really excited to share some ideas for how you can get engaged with Zero Waste Action Month. Remember to share your actions with the hashtag Zero Waste Action Month. And hopefully you'll get some inspiration from our guests today who are joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Danny, who's going to be guiding our conversation today, and she can introduce herself, and then we'll introduce our guests as well.
Nice. Thanks, Hayden. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniella Menendez, or Daniella Menendez, and I am the Outreach Coordinator with Race to Zero Waste. And today we're very, very lucky. We have two pros in the industry, Lindsey and Alexis Lettis. So if you all can just please tell us basic introductions, you can restate your names, pronouns, and then your company info. And I should mention as well, my pronouns are she, her. So Lindsey, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lindsey, she, her as well. I work at FABSCRAP. I'm a regional manager. I've been with FABSCRAP for about almost 3 years now. We are a textile recycling nonprofit based primarily out of Brooklyn, New York, but opening our newest Philadelphia location in the next couple of months, which we're excited about. And we work with pre-consumer waste. So we're a recycling service who works with the fashion industry to take in their textile waste and make sure it doesn't end up in landfill. And we also have a sorting facility, and we're a fabric source for young designers and students and home sewers because most of what we take in is totally reusable. So we make sure it's going back out to the community.
That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you, Lindsey. And Alexis.
Yes, I'm Alexis Lettis, she, her as well. I am a partner at Regent Apparel. We are a uniform manufacturer headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've been around for 100 years, and in evaluating where we want to go with our next 100 years, we really looked at the materials that we're making and the world that we want to see for future generations, and wanted to focus on resource recovery within the uniform and hospitality segment, and identifying reuse, repair, and recycle options to support our B2B customers, and also work on advocacy within the local government and statewide California level to promote some policies that would make sure these products are diverted from landfill.
Nice. Thank you so much for that. So to start this off, I guess I'll start with the first question on, and we can go, I guess we could start with Lindsey, and then Alexis, we could bounce off, but obviously we want this to be as conversational as possible. So feel free to jump in whenever. But can you tell us how sustainability is developing at your company?
Yeah. So, definitely every organization that operates has to think about sustainability just in their operations and how they set up their offices and their space. But when it comes to FABSCRAP, I really think of us as an organization set up to help other companies achieve their sustainability goals because we are a recycling service. And so we really want to reach any company that makes textile waste. Primarily we work with the fashion industry and the interiors industry, but also the entertainment industry creates production waste. Architecture firms create textile waste. It kind of ranges most industries. So we're really, our goal is to be a resource and to give people a sustainable option for what they can do if they over order, or if they produce waste, or just any fabrics that they no longer have a use for. we want to make sure that they have a path that's not just throwing it in the landfill or incinerating it. We want to make sure there's some options, and primarily, especially in pre-consumer waste, that was a large hole. And a lot of cities struggle with recycling facilities in general, and textile waste is definitely not on the top of anyone's mind when it comes to that. So we're really looking to fill that gap.
It's interesting that textiles take up such a large sum of the items that are being thrown away or disposed of, and yet, like what you just said, it's not on anyone's mind at all. People don't think about it at all. And Alexis, I mean, you see that, of course, in the hospitality industry as well.
I think it's definitely, I appreciate what Lindsey's saying about supporting other organizations in meeting their sustainability goals. I think so. Regent supplies commercial laundries primarily who wash and rent out uniforms, which we all know the rental model has a lot of sustainability benefits, but within the industry, there's more we could be doing to have like collection for used materials and reuse and repair at the back end. So we're really looking at take back programs. And the great thing about the uniform industry is the large volume of like kind products that we're able to consolidate and deal with that material altogether. So collect versus something like consumer waste, post-consumer waste, which has a lot of challenges with sorting and identification. We're able to have a customer deliver 5,000 pounds of a certain textile that is 100% polyester, and we're a lot more likely to be able to find a home for that than a mixed bundle of who knows what. So I think I also think it's really critical to think about educating organizations about their textile use. I think, in California, at least, local governments all have environmental purchasing policies in place where they should be procuring goods that have the lowest environmental impact. But I don't think that they're aware. Most procurement offices don't have the tools to understand the textile element of that. They're thinking more about like wastewater or electricity, and textiles is a big issue that I think educating purchasers and decision makers is really something we can push.
And I think you really pointed out a good point in that textiles, especially if it's mixed material textiles, there are no markets for that, and it's very difficult to recover. And I'm sure you see that as well, Lindsey, in the fashion industry. How do you mitigate that? So do you mainly just bring in textiles, Alexis and Lindsey, that are the same color, or are they always the same material type? How do you work that out?
So we've established some take back programs with our customers for same color, same fabric content. And the great thing about what we do at Regent that actually we're set up already for success in this is that we have repeat business from the same customers for a large, like a chef coat, for example, a white chef coat. We sell 2,000 coats a week or a month to the same customer all year long, right? So we know where to get it back from, and we already have the logistics in place for the outbound, and then it's really about collecting it back. I will say that our biggest hurdle, though, is finding a home for even the like kind products that we do bring back. I have a customer in New York, and I'm going to follow up with Lindsey after this call, who has a bunch of material that I can't find a home for, it's expensive to ship product around. That's the biggest hurdle, is the cost for us, at least, is the cost of transportation, and the labor to bale things. I mean, there's just not a lot of value in the commercial textiles that we're using. I know Lindsey's materials have more design aspects. So I don't think that was a tangent to your question, but
no, that was perfect. That was great.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting, Alexis, to hear you talk about like kind of managing what you bring in and having some kind of regularity in what you're bringing in, whereas FABSCRAP is kind of a different world. We don't know what's coming, and we'll take anything and we'll take any fabrics of any size. Really, our limitation is pre-consumer, so we don't take any used clothing or textiles, no bedding or linens, just because we found there were already streams for those in New York City especially. And we had the whole for pre-consumer, but that means we're getting in a huge range of things. We get in literal scraps from the cutting room that are tiny and mixed fiber, and we get in bolts of fabric that is just like readily reusable and we can turn over to another designer. Our sorting process, which we do with the help of volunteers, is really sorting through and trying to figure out what is this. And I mentioned most of our stuff, we do get a lot of stuff that's reusable and that we can make available to other designers and students and home sewers. 60% of what we take in is reusable. The other 40% we recycle. And the recycling method we use is actually like a downcycling method, and it's a fiber shredding. And so it becomes this insulation material called shoddy. If anyone is familiar with that, it's shredded fibers and it gets used in housing insulation, car door panels, carpet padding. There's a whole bunch of uses for it, but technically it is a downcycling because the original fabric is losing some value. The fiber to fiber technology that we kind of dream of just isn't available in the US, just isn't happening right now. So that's the goal. We would love to turn the cotton scraps that we have back into cotton yarn and really get it circular. But right now that's not really a feasible option in the recycling field, in the US specifically. So yeah, so we sort through the material. We can downcycle blended materials. That's heavily what is being used in the fashion industry. People have really prefer a blend fabric, a synthetic, a poly cotton, something like that. We can recycle or downcycle anything that doesn't have spandex, which is a very, very popular material these days. So that's one of my call outs to the fashion industry is like, can we cool it on the spandex? That is a very hard material to recycle. We don't have any, FABSCRAP doesn't currently have any sources for how to like downcycle spandex material. So what our volunteers do is sort out anything that has even 1% of spandex. Anything that's 100% cotton, wool, polyester, any of those blends that don't contain spandex, we can send to the shredder. Anything that's larger than a yard, we make available for reuse. And then we're kind of left over, the hard area is the small spandex scraps. We sell scrap packs on our website. That patchwork is very in right now. We're very excited about that trend. It's a great zero waste method, and it's a great way to use the scrap packs. But also, like, we've turned to boxing studios who will fill their boxing bags with spandex scrap because it's dense and it's heavy. With animal shelters, we'll use it in animal beds, but we have to really get creative because there's not a traditional recycling method to deal with that kind of waste. So that's what we look at and kind of study when we're sorting through our materials.
That's amazing. That's so much information packed into those like 5 minutes. So cool. Just to like bring it around to an application for our listeners, for our viewers, for Zero Waste Action Month. I just want to bring it back to thinking about like, we have our own clothes, and maybe some of us who are involved in zero waste or involved in sustainability, like we know about fast fashion, we know about maybe problems with recycling markets for clothing, how a large number of our clothes that we donate or that we think we're donating is being shipped overseas to these massive used clothing markets that may or may not be beneficial to the folks over there. And so I think we realize that part, but all the things that go behind it, like Alexis mentioned, transportation. Think about the impact of transporting those materials. Like if we can reduce that transportation factor, that's a big step forward. And then how we talked about the recycling technology that may or may not be available. So we have our clothes and maybe we think we're doing something really good by donating our clothes or maybe giving it to a secondhand shop or a thrift store. But we have to make sure that we're donating things that are of quality, right? Because some of those things get thrown out and still end up being landfilled. Lindsey she addressed like so many ways that they're trying to get creative with how they reuse the fabrics that they're given. And this is from an industrial perspective. These are commercial fabrics, not even talking about clothes that have been worn, clothes that have been well loved, right? So these are textiles that are fresh off the press, for a way to say it. And it's still difficult to do things with those. So I think it helps us just be conscious of what we're buying and the impact that we have when we take something off the rack, not only when we toss something either to the bin or to the thrift store or as a donation. So yeah, definitely something to think about. If you can reduce, which is the first R, of course, we want to maybe not buy that new dress. As a kind of shout out to reusing clothing, I on purpose wore the same shirt that I wore for our zero waste kickoff because it should be fine to wear the same thing again, to be in public or to be on a screen or to be in a photo. So I just want to encourage folks to think about reusing what they have in your wardrobe.
I just to add to that, I think both of the things that you have been saying has just shown the magnitude of the issue, right? Just the technology, everything around it, the markets that aren't available. It just shows the magnitude of the problem that we have at hand that, again, people don't think about. Alexis, were you about to say something to that?
I was going to follow up on Lindsey's comments. I was also going to say, in addition to wearing, again, thinking about washing your clothes less, because thinking about microfiber shedding and the impact. I mean, your textile products have impacts like in so many steps along the way, every time you wear it and wash with cold water and things like that. So I was going to follow up at the recycling technologies. And I think fashion brands are really responding in ways that may or may not be lip service, or no specific comments, but the non-fashion textile applications that are more B2B and volume based, there's definitely not recycling options in the US for throw your blended textile in a bin and it's going to get recycled. But with large volume monomer textiles, the 100% polyester, there are a couple options to explore fiber to fiber, which is something that we're doing with Regent Apparel. And we're really trying to design with recyclability in mind. And, 100% polyester is a plastic product. So unlike the fashion industry, and I'm definitely not very fashionable or apparel, clothes minded, clothes with a TH, not, but I look at a textile that's 100% poly to be more akin to a plastic food container, right? And what's the supply chain from this? What's the application it can be used for next? How long is it going to last? What's the life on this? And so when we're designing products, looking at designing 100% polyester product that could be incorporating recycled polyester into the initial design, and then also offering our customers a take back program where it will be used for fiber to fiber is an exciting way to get a long life out of a uniform garment that needs to be durable, and fashion isn't a requirement.
Totally. And I think that's actually a great segue into our next question, which is when and how did you realize that zero waste principles were important to implement in the textile industry? Alexis, if you want to start with that.
Yeah,
and then Lindsey.
So Regent has been around for a long time, and it's actually a family-run business. And I'm part of the family ownership, and I did not want to, I think a lot about plastic, and it dawned on me 3 or 4 years ago that we're just dealing in plastic. And I want to think about what's the home for this and what is the end result. and just thinking about our environmental footprint as a business. And unfortunately, the way our take, make, waste economy, our linear economy is currently set up is not sustainable. We need to be thinking about more circular solutions that will allow businesses to profit off of something else than making a product and selling a product. So it really made me want to pursue a challenge of, okay, how can we offer a service that adds value to our customers that isn't just selling another product?
Fast fashion is a huge problem, and living in Madrid right now, I mean, people are very fashionable here. And I just, on a personal note, I do love fashion, and I like, I like the styles. I like keeping up with them. I try to buy secondhand as much as possible, but it gets hard. And like the fast fashion industry is just so wasteful. And like what you just said, the linear model of it, it's just not feasible. It's not sustainable, and it's not long term. And Lindsey, I'm sure you're way more well versed than I am, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in terms of like discovering the issue, and I was working in fashion styling and like retail merchandising, and I was totally clueless. Like sustainable fashion wasn't really something on my radar. But I'm a home sewer, and I credit FABSCRAP with my discovery of this issue, and that's how I found it. I was a home sewer. I heard FABSCRAP, if you volunteered, you got free fabric, so I went. And when I walked into the building, and this was a few locations ago, it was FABSCRAP's original location in Queens. It was in the back of a hanky-panky factory, and you literally walked through the factory, watch people like making clothes. You get to FABSCRAP's FABSCRAP section, and it was just a mountain of waste. And I was like blown away. And I mean, the mountain is so much larger now that we've been operating for 5 years, but it was just incredible. And it's like, oh, this is all textile waste. And then, in the sorting process, I was there to volunteer. I start going through the bag, and 60% of it's reusable. 60% of it is like gorgeous fabrics. But I was like, why are people tossing these? I was like dumbfounded. I just felt like totally caught off guard. And then I took some fabric, did a home sewing project, went back to work like in a retail store, and like really like my eyes just felt like open. It was like, wait, that dress got returned because it has a broken zipper, and what are we doing with it? Are we tossing it? I was like, no, wait. And then it's like, you kind of then start noticing all the waste that's being created, and what are we doing with this unsold merchandise? Like, we're sending it back to the main company, but what happens to it? So it's like, once you kind of know about it and start digging, and then it's like you kind of get caught up, and it's like, oh my gosh, like you said, like the scope of the problem's huge. But I'm like proof that like I was working in the fashion industry and I was ignoring it completely. So I know Alexis mentioned education. It's like a huge component of this work. I think people just need to realize like the ethical and kind of thoughtful consumption. And that goes back to fast fashion. It's like, really think about that $5 dress you're wearing, like who made it? How is it being sold at profit for $5? So like, what is the cost? What was paid to the garment workers who made that outfit? What was the waste it took like that to even get it here? There's waste, in its pre-life. But then are you going to wear it once, and then what are you going to do with it? Are you going to toss it? Is it probably designed poorly to fall apart after a few washes? Like, then what? And then you're going to buy a new one. And so just like putting some real thought and education into what you're buying is just kind of the main point.
It's so fascinating how like we come up with for electronics, for example, the idea of right to repair. Maybe that's something that we need to start thinking about with our clothing as well. So repairing the things that we have, and then also, as you mentioned, sewing, I think is, we think about these sort of like old school skills, and if you can like sew a button on or fix a zipper, like you said, that's something that we should, maybe more of us should dedicate some time to doing. But also realize that not all of us have the time to be able to do that. So things like tailors or repair shops, like it would be great to see more of those in our communities. But then if it's a $5 dress, are you going to pay $20 for it to get repaired? Like that's another difficulty for things like that. And I'm sure businesses have that difficulty too if they're thinking about uniforms. Like I worked in food service and we just had to buy our own t-shirts as the uniform. And then once they were worn out, like you do whatever you want with it, just buy another one. So like not only in our own minds do we have to take responsibility for, like really, yeah, like you said, ethically consuming and caring for that garment, but also from a business perspective. And I'll turn it over to Alexis to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Hayden, I think that is a great point and something that listeners can actually like take action on. If you work at a restaurant and you're getting issued a shirt, or there's a lot of other options. Rental uniforms are a great solution. The companies that launder and rent out uniforms do not waste anything. I mean, they repair everything. They get the most. I mean, this is how they earn their money, is getting the most rent out of a product that doesn't cost that much, right? So they are experts at linen management, and a company that could look at a rental model for uniforms is going to divert a lot more from a landfill rather than a company that is having employees directly purchase something, and that will probably, that you don't want. I mean, I have so many t-shirts from like races and things that's like, I don't need this. And I love that the conversation is really focusing on repair and reuse. It's, I think, exciting to think about fiber to fiber recycling and like flashy things, but like the boxing bag example is great. It's like, okay, what can we do in our own community that is not sending something far away, or utilizing more resources to like generate new fabric? It really has a big impact. It's just using what we already have in the ecosystem and as locally as possible.
Basically just going back to the basics of repair. I mean, that just used to be how it was to repair the shoes, to repair the clothing. And it's really gone out of hand. And I think, Lindsey, you brought up a great point of equity, and knowing where your clothes are coming from and who's making them. And so can you talk about how your organization is or aspires to be addressing the equity issue and the accessibility while practicing and maintaining zero waste?
Yeah, definitely. Accessibility is a word that we put in our statement, in our mission statement. It's something we think about on a few different levels. We want to be accessible as a recycling resource. And a little bit tied to the last question in the last combo, responsibility is something we think of a lot. Like, who's responsible for the end life of this product? Is it the consumer? Is it the brand? Like right now it feels like someone wears something and uses it, and then everyone kind of goes, not my problem. Like, I don't have to figure out what to do with it. You bought it. But then it's like, and the consumer's like, well, you made it. And it's all like, and then it just sits in a landfill. And so we want to really put like some responsibility behind the end life of these products. And so with the companies we work with and who are using our recycling service, we have a service fee. So if you're recycling fabric with us, you are paying to recycle your fabric. And it's kind of our way of holding the fashion companies responsible financially for the waste they create. So we think that's really important. Like, you're creating this waste, like someone has to pay for the recycling's not free. I think these are very expensive technologies. Someone has to pay for it. If you're making it, like, there's some education behind that too. And honestly, with the fashion industry, getting them to change their ways is a financial incentive. And so if they don't want to pay as much in recycling costs, then they can create less waste. So there's that. But at the same time, we want young designers, we want small designers, we want sustainable zero waste businesses to be able to use our recycling resource. So we think about that in the costs that we create. And so we do that by, our cost is based solely on like the pounds that you recycle. So if you're creating little waste or you're not making as much waste, then you're not paying as much as a large company. And large companies aren't getting like these big mass quantity discounts. It's all very like fair and equitable in that way. And then on the other side of things, on the secondhand side, talking about reuse, and we're making these fabrics that were thrown out available to the community. We're trying to do that in the most accessible way possible. We do like a thrift store model, so we're cheaper than a more traditional fabric store. If you volunteer with us, you can take fabric for free. We work with nonprofits and schools to provide them fabric for free. We have a pay what you wish section on our website and in our locations. So just some of our material is just pay what you can, take it for free if you need it. Like, we want these materials in the hands of designers, and we want as many people to be able to access them as possible. So that's kind of the work we're doing.
That's amazing. That's really great to hear. Alexis?
Yeah, so I'm responding about equity. Is this what I'm, yes. Okay. So, so I guess our equity piece is really more in who's making your clothes. We're a manufacturer, and we have our own production facility in the Dominican Republic, where we have social compliance certifications and high standards. And we've actually our price has continued to go up relative to a lot of our competitors who are outsourcing to Africa and other parts of East Asia that do not have the same level of oversight of their facilities. So that's definitely something that's very important to us. And so rather than kind of being a race to the bottom with finding the cheapest labor source possible, we're trying to find other customers who value that in their products. Which, truth be told, in the B2B world, you know, because you're not trying to get the hearts of a consumer, you're just looking at a bottom line, it's more challenging. So we're being strategic with that. And then also in terms of equity, I think, you know, we know that the people who are wearing our products, they don't have a choice a lot of the times in what they're wearing. So their employer is mandating that they wear a specific garment, and we want to make sure that it is not toxic to them. I mean, chemicals in textiles is another big issue, so PFAS specifically. And so we're making sure that we're researching our supply chain really well to make sure that our products don't have that.
Speaking of supply chains, I have a question from our Facebook audience here. So in talking about companies being responsible and things like that, we have a question about carbon credits. Do you know or work with any companies who are doing carbon credits? And if you see that as a responsible way to deal with a carbon footprint, I know that it's a bit controversial for some organizations, and that if you're looking at overall reduction, maybe a carbon credit just allows you to pollute more. So do we know anything about how manufacturers are dealing with that in the textile industry?
I don't know any manufacturer specifically. I think I would tend to agree with, and I have not done a ton of research, but my feeling is it's probably just an excuse to make more waste and look nice to your customers. But I don't know the specifics of.
Yeah, I would agree that maybe it's kind of a greenwashing thing, but Lindsey seems like she's nodding, like she really wants to say something.
No, I was just nodding in kind of in agreement. Definitely carbon offsets. I mean, I'm from the fashion industry, so sometimes that kind of technological and like engineering language kind of goes a little over my head. Definitely not my field of the industry. I think there's a good amount of fairness in saying that it might be a greenwashing kind of thing.
I think, and this is a sad statement because it really requires like a major overhaul about the way that we think about making money. And it's not like the only way to really change our impact in the textile industry is to make and sell less stuff. I mean, that's just sad but true. And I think companies that are doing repair reuse efforts is a measurable way to kind of like, oh, like let's see, we can still earn money off the same product that we made once, we can resell it. And I think that's the way to really have a better impact. Like what
I think
doing.
Yeah, I think that you just nailed it on the head, that we need to just switch our brains and our mindset from the traditional sense of economy and making money and consumption, and really turn it circular and realize there's money in the circular economy. We can create jobs. We can create money off the same product that we've had. You know, we could pass it down. We could turn it into something new. There's just endless amount of money, if that's a concern for people, can be made from circular economies and circular ways of life, for sure.
I would just add to that this is another area of action, perhaps, is that there's money to be made in a circular economy, but there's not, for a small company like Regent, for example, like there's not the infrastructure in place. There needs to be policies that spur that infrastructure that would allow us to take advantage of that sort of business model. And local governments and state governments, and of course the federal government, that are all big users of textiles. So if we can, beyond our individual consumption and beyond talking to our own, within our own organizations, if you're doing any advocacy, local government, like just bring it to their attention that there's other ways to deal with textiles. And if they start putting programs in place for return, take back models that other private companies can kind of join, we'd all be better off.
I think that's also an accessibility piece to businesses that are trying to do the right thing, right? Create accessible markets for them and industries for them to thrive in that can promote it. And good segue to sort of the last question as well. What action can our audience take for the Zero Waste Action Month? Are there questions they should be asking in their life or at work, or policies they could support, et cetera, that you may know about?
Yeah, I would say, kind of circling back to something I had mentioned before, but my big thing would just be to put extra thought into what you're purchasing and what you're consuming, especially related to clothing. Learning a mending skill, for sure, is a nice way to start. Hayden mentioned that that's a kind of a lost skill, but yes, for sure, you'll notice as soon as you tell someone you know how to sew or you learn to sew a button, people come at you with their clothes that they need repaired. So if you can learn even just one skill, like a zipper repair or how to add a button, you can really help so many different pieces of clothing. So that's a really just simple way to do, and it's kind of fun and meditative, a little creative outlet. But yeah, just putting a little extra thought behind the work. In terms of policies, I know in California specifically, there's a lot of policy and change happening right now with garment workers specifically. There's an activist, Elizabeth Klein, who I follow, who I know does a lot of work in that field. I would love to see that spread. I think California has the largest congregation of garment workers in the US, so it really feels like where the home base for that is right now. But I would send everyone that way. I think they're making really nice strides.
Alexis, before you give your final tip, we have one more question from Facebook. If you have a couple of extra minutes, Lindsey, Alexis, are you okay to answer one more question? Great. So I kind of want to take it back to the spandex issue that Alexis had mentioned at the beginning. So one of the questions is if there's any kind of incentive within the industry to use those materials less frequently, or if there's some kind of business plan to handle those on the front end. So you mentioned maybe they could stop using plastic or the spandex within the fashion industry, or that maybe we could stop buying those when we see them on the rack, but wondering if there's any kind of incentive or plan.
No real incentives or plans or anything. We use it as a point of education for the brands that we work with. We create data reports. Overall in the industry, and we've mentioned this before too, textile waste is really a mysterious issue because there's very little data and research put behind it. So FABSCRAP is really dedicated to taking extensive data on what we bring in, what it is, and where it goes. And so individually for each client that works with us and uses us as a recycling service, we provide them data. Like, here's how much fabric you recycled with us this year. Here's what it was. This much was spandex, this much was cotton. We were able to reuse 50% of it, but 30% was downcycled. And so specifically around spandex, it's a talking point, like, hey, the spandex that you're giving us, if 90% of your fabrics that you recycle with us have spandex in them, like, just so you know, that's a very hard material to recycle. And if you're not giving us amounts that are reusable, then we're having to find these like creative loopholes to kind of deal with it. And so it's an education point, but right now we don't have any incentives. And then it can also be a consumer education point, but that's a little harder. And I'm hesitant to put all the responsibility on consumers and tell them what to buy. Good point,
yes.
When the corporations are the ones creating the waste and creating the problem. But definitely if you see a pair of jeans and one has spandex and one doesn't, I mean, it's a choice that you can go ahead and like have some thought behind. But really, whichever pair you choose, as long as you love them and repair them, and like on that side of the consumer, that's where I feel like the consumer responsibility lays, is just not purchasing for purchasing's sake. But yeah.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity on that. And I guarantee you after this, I'm going to be looking at my tags to see what clothing I have that has spandex in it.
Oh, everything.
Yeah.
And especially with athleisure, everything has, it's an astounding amount. Once it's like I said, once you notice, then you never stop noticing.
So that's a new point for me for fabrics. Like we know that, polyester is plastics and things like that, but the difficulty of recycling spandex. So I learned something today. So thank you for that. And then maybe it's something, if there are no incentives, maybe it's something that we can advocate for, maybe policy wise, because we do need to make sure that these companies, manufacturers are being responsible with what they're manufacturing. All right, and I guess I'll turn it over to Alexis now. Thank you for giving us a couple of extra minutes for that Facebook question. And then if you want to just share any final thoughts, and then what actions folks can do from your perspective.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts are that textiles are incredibly complicated materials, and that most people don't appreciate that and have the time to spend the energy thinking about how complicated textiles are. So help, anything that our listeners can do outside of your own consumption is just helping educate friends, family about their decisions around purchasing and using textiles, and also really advocating to organizational purchasers of textiles can have a great impact, because they're not buying one shirt, they're buying 1,000 shirts. And that has the real potential to make a difference to really get us the infrastructure that we need to deal with the problem.
I would say, Alexis, when we first met, we were working on potentially putting into contract language for municipal contracts for uniforms, right? So working with local jurisdictions, working with state governments. There's a lot of uniforms and textiles that are being used within agencies, federally, state, and local. So that is huge, along with the fashion industry.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. We appreciate your time. This was a really lively and awesome, great discussion. The textile industry is a huge problem, and I'm happy today we got to educate our listeners and hear about the experts in the industry. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think we definitely learned some things, and hopefully folks can go out and take some action. Make sure that you remember to post about the action that you take, whether it's personal or in your community, within your family, or on a business level, right? The things that we learned about today can definitely be applied on that front. So take this knowledge go forth, and please post with hashtag Zero Waste Action Month. And we hope to see the new things that you learn and do this month. So thanks so much, Lindsey and Alexis, and I hope y'all have a great day over in the US.